Okay, so today we're going deep on something that's super important, even though it might not sound super exciting right off the bat.
Yeah, documentation, informed consent, and safety reporting in clinical trials, all that good stuff.
It might seem kind of dry at first glance,
Yeah,
but honestly, understanding this stuff is like understanding how we know that the medicines we take are actually safe and work like they should.
for sure.
It's like the foundation of trust in the whole process.
Exactly.
So for this deep dive, we've gone through a ton of material. I mean, we're talking regulations straight from CFR Title 21.
Oh, yeah, that one covers a lot of ground.
It does. It does, from the actual making of the drugs to how the clinical trials are run.
And, of course, we've got those ICH guidelines.
International ones, right?
Yep. Plus, we dove into those detailed GMP handbooks.
GMP, so good manufacturing practices, that's always key.
Absolutely. We even looked at how quality audits actually work. Those manuals are fascinating.
And to get a real feel for things, we checked out some YouTube videos too, workshops and talks from FDA folks and experts in the industry.
Yeah, that's where you get those real-world insights.
Exactly. And just to round things out, we even looked back at some historical stuff like the whole thalidomide tragedy.
Oh, man, that one really shows why we need these processes in place.
It does. It's a stark reminder.
For sure.
So what we're aiming for today is to sort of distill all this information, all these different sources, into something clear and understandable.
Yeah, cut through the noise.
Exactly. We want to make the key parts of documentation, informed consent, and safety reporting clear and, dare I say, engaging.
Well, we can try at least.
We can try. So think of this as like your cheat sheet to these really important parts of clinical trials.
Your shortcut to the essentials.
Right. So let's jump right in. And I think the natural place to start is with documentation.
Absolutely. That's the foundation.
It is. And there's that one phrase that keeps popping up everywhere we looked, especially in those GMP materials.
Oh, you mean if it's not documented, it didn't happen?
That's the one. It's so simple, but so powerful.
It really is, especially when you think about how regulated this whole field is.
Right. So why is that phrase so crucial? What makes documentation so important in the grand scheme of things?
Well, think about it. Documentation is like the proof. It's the evidence that everything was done right, that every step was followed, every observation recorded, every decision made, all the way from the beginning of a trial to developing the actual product.
It's like the paper trail that shows everything was done by the book.
Exactly. And without it, you can't really prove that the study was done correctly, that the data is accurate, that the equipment was working right.
And if you can't prove it, you can't really trust the results, right?
Exactly. And that's a huge problem. It can impact patient safety.
Yeah.
And it just makes the whole thing less credible.
Makes sense. So it's not just about writing down that something happened, but also when it happened.
Oh, absolutely. That's what they call contemporaneous documentation.
Right.
The FDA folks in their YouTube videos on those bioanalytical inspections really hammered that home.
And we saw that a lot in the GMP handbooks too, right?
All over the place. It's super important. You need to be recording things in real time as they're happening.
Not trying to remember later and write it down, right?
Nope. That's not good enough. And the level of detail matters, too.
Yeah.
You need enough information that someone who wasn't there could understand what went down and why.
So timestamps for like sample collections, the ID of the specific equipment used, that kind of thing.
All of that, and anytime you deviate from the plan, any changes to the protocol, you've got to document the reason for it.
It's all about transparency.
It really is.
Now, when it comes to actually writing things down, those YouTube videos on good documentation practices got really specific, especially for handwritten stuff.
Oh, yeah. Black, indelible ink, only, no pencils allowed.
That was clear.
Very clear, and they were really big on making sure everything's legible.
Which makes sense. If you can't read it, what's the point?
Exactly. And no ditto marks or empty spaces either. Those can cause confusion or, even worse, someone could tamper with the records later on.
And if you need to make a correction...
Single line through it, original's got to stay visible, then your initials, and the date of the correction.
It's all about that audit trail.
Yep. Got to be able to track everything.
I remember that Cheos Lunch and Learn video. They had that story about an investigator who got in trouble just because they forgot to date their signature on a document.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It seems like a small thing, but it shows how seriously they take this stuff.
It does. A small oversight like that can be a red flag for an auditor.
What do you think goes through their mind when they see something like that?
I think it makes them wonder if there's a bigger problem. Like if they're not paying attention to details like that, what else are they missing?
Right. It makes you question their overall rigor and if they really understand the regulations.
Exactly. And it just undermines confidence in the whole study.
Now, when it comes to electronic records, it's the same principles, but the implementation is totally different.
Yeah, the focus shifts to validating the systems themselves,
Making sure they're reliable and do what they're supposed to.
and that the audit trails are rock solid.
Those are super important. What makes them so essential in an electronic system?
Well, think of it like a log that records every single change made to a record, who made it, when, and sometimes even why.
So it's like a history of every action in the system.
Exactly. And it's all time-stamped and secure, so you can't really mess with it without leaving a trace.
Makes it a lot harder to hide any mistakes or do anything shady.
For sure. And you need secure access controls too, not just anyone should be able to get in there and make changes.
And you always want people entering the original data directly into the system.
No copying from other sources or anything like that.
Right. We saw that emphasized in those YouTube discussions and even in some of those Season 2 transcripts on data management.
It's all about ensuring the data is accurate and reliable.
Another thing that stood out was the need for logbooks for all those calibration and maintenance activities.
Oh yeah, the EA's consulting group folks were big on that.
It's like you need a record to show that all the equipment used in the trial was working properly.
Absolutely. Got to have that proof.
So you could be confident in the data.
Right. And if anything goes wrong during maintenance or calibration, you need to document that too, and what you did to fix it.
Everything needs to be accounted for.
It does, and then there's the question of how long you need to keep all this documentation. It's not just a short-term thing.
No, not at all. EA's consulting group mentioned at least 6 years, sometimes longer.
And sometimes even longer if it's related to a serious adverse event.
Why so long? What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, you need to be able to track safety signals over the long term. So if something comes up years after a drug is approved, you can go back and look at the original data.
That makes sense.
And you need to be able to respond to any regulatory inquiries or audits that might come up down the line.
So it's about accountability and being able to prove you did things right.
Exactly. And it shows that you're committed to patient safety and data integrity.
Now let's talk a bit about batch records. Those are covered in 21 CFR Part 211, and they seem super detailed.
They are. They're like the instruction manual for making each batch of a drug.
So every single batch is made the same way?
Right. Consistency is key here. You want to make sure every batch meets the same quality standards.
So those master production and control records lay out everything, right?
Everything. All the ingredients, the exact amounts, what equipment to use, the steps in the process, even the expected yield.
And that level of detail is essential to make sure every batch is the same, right?
Absolutely. It's all about guaranteeing quality and purity.
We also can't forget about how to handle complaints. That Easy Global training video on YouTube really stressed that.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
They said it's not just good practice to have written SOPs for everything.
SOPs, those are standard operating procedures.
Right. So you need those SOPs for how you receive complaints, document them, investigate them, and resolve them.
And you need records to prove you followed those SOPs every step of the way.
So documentation isn't just about the good stuff, it's also about how you handle the problems.
Exactly. It's about learning from mistakes and making sure they don't happen again.
It's all part of that quality culture.
It is. So documentation is super important, but it's also crucial for making sure informed consent is done ethically.
Right. Now, our sources didn't really get into the step-by-step process of getting informed consent.
Yep.
But they did emphasize the ethical principle behind it, that people need to understand what they're signing up for and they have to agree to participate voluntarily.
And documentation plays a huge role in ensuring that happens.
How so?
Well, think about it. If important information about a participant isn't documented properly, like their medical history, it raises questions about whether they should have even been in the trial in the first place.
Yeah, that came up in that OSIS workshop video.
It did. And if you're missing key information like that, it looks like you didn't properly assess their eligibility or the potential risks for them.
So it undermines the whole idea of informed consent.
It does. It makes it seem like you're not really being upfront with people.
So those missing documents aren't just a procedural oversight, they have real ethical implications.
Absolutely. And 21 CFR 312.56 makes it clear that sponsors have to monitor investigators to make sure they're following the rules.
Which includes making sure informed consent is done right.
Right, so they have to check that the investigators are sticking to the signed agreements, like the FDA Form 1572.
And that they're following the investigational plan.
Which includes getting informed consent properly.
So it all ties back to documentation.
It does. It's all connected.
Okay, so we've covered documentation and how it relates to informed consent. Let's move on to another key area, safety reporting.
This is all about keeping track of what happens during a trial and making sure any problems are reported to the right people.
And the sponsor plays a big role here, right?
They do. They're responsible for maintaining a safety database that includes all the new safety information that comes up during the trial.
Like any adverse events that occur.
Exactly. They have to be on top of that.
And there are two main types of safety reports they need to know about, right? Those 15-day reports and the 7-day reports.
Yep, those are the big ones.
And those different timelines depend on how serious the adverse event is, right?
Exactly. So for the 15-day reports, those are for serious and unexpected adverse events that are thought to be related to the drug being studied.
And serious has a specific meaning in this context, right?
It does. It usually means something like death, a life-threatening event, hospitalization, disability, or a birth defect.
And unexpected means it's not something that was already known to be a potential side effect of the drug.
Right. It's something new or something that's happening more often than expected.
And these reports have to be submitted to the FDA within 15 days of the sponsor finding out about the event.
Yep. And they usually use a form called FDA 3500A for that.
Or they can do it in a narrative format if it's an event that happened outside the U.S.
Right. And those reports go to this specific FDA division that's overseeing that particular IND application.
That's the investigational new drug application, right?
Yep. And they need to include a form called 1571 as a cover sheet so the FDA knows where to send it.
So it's all very structured and organized.
It is. They have a whole system in place.
And then for those really critical events, there are the 7-day reports.
Those for the most serious situations.
Like when someone dies or there's a life-threatening event.
Right. And it has to be unexpected and related to the drug.
So in those cases, the FDA needs to be notified right away, within 7 days.
Yep. And they usually do that by phone or fax.
Just to get the word out quickly.
Exactly. And then they have to follow up with a full written report within 15 days.
So it's like a 2-step process for those urgent situations.
It is. They want to make sure they get the information as soon as possible.
And this whole safety monitoring thing doesn't just end when a drug gets approved, right?
No, it continues even after the drug is on the market.
We talked about that in Season 8, about the challenges the FDA faces.
It's a constant process. They're always looking for new safety information.
And the sponsor has to keep the investigators updated on any safety events, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Everyone involved needs to know what's going on.
So it's a shared responsibility.
It is. Everyone's got to do their part to keep patients safe.
And of course, the FDA plays a big role in all of this. They're the ones who make sure everyone's following the rules.
They're the enforcers.
That's right. And we learned in that FDA CITC 2024 video that they often do inspections, especially for new drugs, or if there are big changes to an existing drug.
Inspections are a regular part of the process.
So what actually happens during an FDA inspection?
Well, FDA investigators go to the places where the clinical trials are being done, or to the sponsors' facilities, or to the manufacturing plants, and they check everything.
They really dig in.
They do. They look at all the documentation. They watch how people are doing their jobs. They interview the staff. They want to make sure everything's being done according to the regulations.
And sometimes they issue a form FDA 483, right?
Yep, that's their way of saying they found some potential problems.
But it's important to remember that those are just observations, right? They're not necessarily proof that a rule was broken.
That's a crucial point. It just means the investigator thinks something might be wrong.
But the company still has to take it seriously, right?
Oh, absolutely. They need to respond quickly and thoroughly.
That video said they have 15 business days to respond.
Yep, and they need to say whether they agree or disagree with each observation.
And if they agree that something needs to be fixed, they have to come up with a plan.
A corrective and preventive action plan, or KPA.
Right, so they need to say how they're going to fix the problem and how they're going to stop it from happening again.
And they need to give timelines and say how they'll check if the fix worked.
And of course, they need to provide any documents that support their response.
It's all about showing the FDA that they're taking things seriously.
And if the FDA finds more serious problems, they might issue an OAI classification.
That stands for Official Action Indicated.
And that's a much bigger deal, right?
It is. It means the FDA is really concerned and they might take further action.
Like issuing a warning letter, delaying approval of a drug, or even taking legal action.
So yeah, it's not something you want to get.
Definitely not.
They also talked about those remote regulatory assessments, or RRAs, in that video.
Those are kind of like virtual inspections, right?
Yeah, they're a newer way of doing things.
Yeah.
The FDA can request documents and hold meetings online instead of having to send someone out to the site.
So it's more efficient.
It can be, and allows them to check in more often.
But it doesn't totally replace on-site inspections.
No, those are still necessary in some cases.
But it shows that the FDA is trying to keep up with the times.
Definitely, they're adapting to new technologies.
So when you look at all of this, all the documentation, the informed consent, the safety reporting, the regulatory oversight, it all boils down to one thing. quality.
Absolutely. It's all about making sure that the drugs we take are safe and effective.
And those processes aren't just about checking boxes, they're about creating a culture of quality.
That's a key point. It's got to be ingrained in everything you do.
And it all ties into risk management too, right?
Yeah, ICHQ-9 talks about identifying and mitigating risks.
So you're not just reacting to problems, you're trying to prevent them in the first place.
Exactly, and that's where documentation comes in. You need to understand your processes so you can figure out where the risks are.
And you need to train people properly so they know how to do things right.
That's crucial. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
And then you need to keep track of everything so you can see if your efforts are working.
And make adjustments if they're not.
It's all about continuous improvement.
It is. It's a never-ending process.
So to sum it all up, documentation, informed consent, and safety reporting are the cornerstones of responsible clinical trials.
They might seem like boring details, but they're what make the whole system work.
They're what protect patients and make sure the drugs we take are safe and effective.
And they're the basis for trust in the entire process.
Trust in the research, trust in the regulators, trust in the medicines themselves.
Without them, the whole thing falls apart.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder.
Go ahead.
If these processes are so important in clinical trials, what other areas of our lives could benefit from this level of rigor?
That's a good question.
Like, what if we applied these principles to other industries or even to our personal lives?
Interesting idea.
Could we improve quality and build more trust?
Something to think about.
It is. So we encourage you to dig into those source materials we talked about, learn more, ask questions.
There's a lot to discover.
There is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.